Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. It is time for the October Q&A. So we've asked you guys to ask some questions and we've picked about 20 of the most popular ones, and we'll answer about half of those in part 1, and then part 2 will probably be up in a few days because we're currently at the PAX, Australia PAX, so we're doing all that kind of coverage.
Yep.
But we thought we'd slot the monthly Q&A, squeeze it in between there before we get benchmarking next week. So anyway, let's get into the questions. Okay, we got Tim all pumped up. He's ready to go. So we'll get into the first question. This one is from Element86. So that is a Discord member. He bought me those cool, if you're near the Harbour Unboxed backplate, and my mouse
that
pad.
stuff is pretty cool.
My mouse pad. You got that. So I'm going to have to speak to him and see if we can order one for Tim, a mouse pad. Anyway, his question is, notice Tim's set has some nice looking seats now. Your seat doesn't have a set. Your set has some seats. What are they, and are they comfortable? They are. These are we put these together.
When we built this, which is
we did a behind the scenes video for that. Did you ever edit that and release it?
I was going to film the final desk now that's been painted. So I spent a couple of weeks painting the final desk, so I wanted to get that done before I film. So that will be coming. I think I mentioned it in the last Q&A, but whatever. Yeah. Anyway, these are the Corsair. What are they? What's the exact model of them? They're the Corsair.
Is it the T2 race, I think it is?
Yeah.
So here we go. You ready? Whoa. But they're pretty cool. They've got... just nearly knocked an X-Wing off a table.
Yeah, well, they're fully
got
adjustable.
Some wheels on the bottom, rollerblade wheel type things. They're fully adjustable. I think last month's Q&A that I did the old recline all the way back.
Yeah. They're very comfortable.
They're very, very comfortable.
Very comfortable.
These, I think it's I said T2, didn't I?
Yeah.
So I've got the T1 race in my studio.
I think, this is the T2 Road Warrior. Something like that.
But yeah, the T1 is much more narrow. It hugs you a lot more. So this is the big man version.
Yeah, it's this nice executive style. It's nice and white. Yeah, it's good. It's really good.
So Corsair T2, to answer your question, is what we're using. Corsair sent a pair of those for Tim and I to do our live stream and Q&A. So
yeah, they're nice. Okay, another Discord-based question here. Any plan on testing the GTX 1060 6GB GDDR5X? And what about the other 1060 6GB that apparently are based on some GP104 iteration?
Yeah, well, I've been out of the loop on that news. I didn't even hear about that. I heard about the GDDR5X version. And yeah, we'll definitely benchmark that the second we can get our hands on it, see what difference there is. I'm not sure. We recently did the memory scaling video with the RTX 2070, 2080, and 2080 Ti, and we noticed, some interesting results there. If you overclock the memory while keeping the cores stock, there is a bit of a performance uplift in some games. Not amazing, but a little bit. Some games, nothing. The GTX 1060, I've personally haven't really done much testing. So it came with 8 gigabits per second memory initially, didn't it? And then it got a 9 gigabits per second version when the RTX 580 launched.
Yep.
And for memory, that was more of a gimmick. It didn't seem to make much difference, despite the fact that some people claim that it's heavily memory limited and that overclocking the memory on a GTX 1060 really helps. I'm not saying that's not true. It just didn't seem to be when the 9 gigabits per second version didn't make much difference. But yeah, we'll test it. You got anything to add to that?
GP104 iteration, we're not sure whether that's because of the GDDR5X, whether it's related to the GDDR5X version or not. But as far as testing that one should perform exactly the same because they'll just cut everything down to exactly the same as GP106.
Assuming that the CUDA core counts the same and everything else, memory, bus width and all that.
I mean, it seems like they might be doing that to sort of get rid of the Pascal inventory that competes with Turing. That's been some people's thoughts on why they might be using GP104.
This is all news to me. My thought straight away after hearing this just moments ago would be that they've got a lot of dies that are more defective or so defective that they can't be GTX 1070s.
Yeah, I mean that's the obvious thing that that's why they usually
and they don't have a 1060 Ti that's based on that die. So yeah, they're just. I don't have a problem with that. That's fine. As long as it's the same spec and you get the same performance, power consumption's much the same, pricing ends up being much the same, then as far as I'm concerned, that is still a GTX 1060. Okay, next question is from Sal Kagan, again another Patreon member. What would you guys like to see from motherboard vendors in the future, given the sort of issues Z390 appears to be having? Okay, well, we just talked about this at length on our Patreon live stream, so I'm going to let you take this one to begin with.
Yeah, so what do we want to say? Well, I guess we've got to start with how there's kind of like the two Intel specifications of you got your base frequency, your TDP, you got sort of your limits. Some motherboards obviously at the moment we've discovered hit that 95 watt limit after a short period of time in sort of your longer workloads. So yeah, and then on top of that, you got your higher end specification. That's, for example, running at the all-core maximum turbo frequency for an unlimited amount of time. That's what we tested personally with our 9900K testing. So it seems like we're in a situation where some boards can only do that minimum specification because either their VRMs aren't up to scratch or they've got just some sort of configuration that's limiting them there. And then there's some boards that can do your maximum spec, like what we tested. So it seems we're in a position where it needs to be made a bit more clear from motherboard vendors whether they're going to support that minimum spec or whether they're supporting the maximum spec. So some sort of identifier, who knows?
I suppose we'll just focus on the Z390 example because this sort of bleeds over into other platforms a little bit, but this is a more extreme example. I suppose with the Intel spec being so broad that you can have a board that will all core boost the 9900K to 4.2 or possibly less. 4.7 is what you'd expect to do because that's what it should do without any overclocking. So I think the main thing from board manufacturers we'd like to see is what everyone's been talking about now for a while is actually define what a phase is and don't call don't call a 4-phase motherboard an 8-phase motherboard just because there's a doubling of components without doublers. So legitimate, phase counts, that would probably help for a start. Because a 4-phase board probably won't handle the 9900K that well, especially overclocked for a long period of time. That's a lot of stress on the VRM. So yeah, define that correctly. And then tying in with what Tim was saying, if the board is limited to 95 watts, say, it supports 9th gen processors, it supports the 9900K at 95 watts.
Yeah.
And then this sort of comes back on Intel a bit. I'd like them to have it as a configurable TDP. So the 9900K is either a 95 watt to 145 watt part.
Yeah, that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And it also would give motherboard manufacturers a reason for people to buy a more expensive board because then you'd have your low tier boards that are your 95 watt boards. And then they could say, we've got our premium Z390 board. That supports the same CPU at 140 watts, so you get more performance, and that will give people a reason to sort of spend that little bit more to get their upper tier products, which are better suited to those CPUs. That's
a much more friendly approach for the buyer because if you know that there's so many boards, like you look at Gigabyte, ASRock, MSI, ASUS, anyway, you look at them, whole slew of boards, and it might be the difference between spending $30 more will get you a board that has no problem running the CPU at full performance, whereas if you saved $30, then you've got to manually remove the limit, and then all of a sudden it's running a bit hotter than you'd probably like it to, especially if you're doing a lot of things like rendering and stuff like that. So yeah.
It's a bigger problem than it's ever been with motherboards and the wide variety of stuff that Intel allows you to do within their specification. We really need to sort of be, testing motherboards more and making it more obvious for buyers what a motherboard's actually providing you. It's no longer the days where you could just buy one off the shelf and they all work the same. There is definitely differences between each one. So
absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of work to be done there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next question. This looks it's been directed at both of us from a Patreon member, but I think this is one for Tim because it covers both of the things you like to look into. Do you know why there aren't laptops with VA panels? That's very much a Tim question.
I thought about this for a while, and there's sort of a few things that I had sort of thought of, but I think the most sensible explanation for this is simply that VA panels aren't made in super high densities. So, for example, there's no 4K VA panels of a monitor size at the moment. For TVs, there are, but for monitors, typically we're seeing them top out at about 1440p, 27-inch, 32-inch. That's the most common configuration for VA. So it seems like there is potentially that sort of density issue. They can't make like a high-resolution laptop-sized display using VA technology, whereas IPS, for example, which is kind of that equivalent for laptops, you can make a 5-inch phone display at 1440p using IPS LCD technology. So
that makes sense.
That's what I was sort of I'm not 100% sure. I haven't asked any manufacturers to comment on that, but I was thinking there's no real other reason why VA couldn't be used for laptops. The power consumption compared to IPS is very similar. It's got good viewing angles, which is another reason why you'd use IPS for laptops. So yeah, I think it just comes down to however they've designed their sort of crystals in there, not being able to get to the densities that you'd need for a 13-inch or 15-inch laptop screen.
Okay, next question. Do you think that AMD will be able to compete with the RTX 2080 Ti, or will they play it safe and offer something competitive with the RTX 2080 like they did with Vega 64? Or like they did with the Vega 64?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think that, yeah, they should be able to compete on 7nm with Navi.
You'd hope so.
With the RTX 2080 Ti. I think with Vega, they were limited by the process tech that they decided to use for Vega, which I believe was 14 nanometers.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue that they had is that they had a very wide CPU design. There was a lot of stream processors in the Vega design, but they couldn't clock it as competitively as they could, as Nvidia could with their chips that used a different process tech.
Yeah.
So they certainly do have a design that if they could get it to clock higher would be competitive with today's top-end chips. But with the future technology, when we're most likely will have both Nvidia and AMD on TSMC 7nm, we're going to be in a situation where, yeah, both companies should be able to make very competitive products with one or another. So, yeah, I would expect definitely that with Navi we should be getting 2080 Ti from like performance. But what do you reckon?
I very much hope so. Yeah. I would think so. It's kind of like, it's one of those situations we saw with the FX series coming to Ryzen. We all hoped Ryzen would be good, but
there's always doubts.
Yeah, no, I wasn't confident. Put it this way, I never thought it would turn out as well as it has.
Yeah.
So hopefully Navi is the same situation.
Okay, question here. Could you make a video exploring undervolting CPUs? In today's age, it seems like everyone wants to overclock. It'd be interesting to see what kind of performance, thermals, power consumption you can get from something like an 8700K or a 2700X at 0.9 volts.
Yeah, that's definitely something we could do. Yeah, haven't really thought about it too much. Interesting question. I've actually been doing a lot of undervolting on my 9900K. I've taken that as low as it'll possibly go while maintaining some sort of stability to see if I could get the power draw down to what we were seeing on some of the 95 watt limited boards. That wasn't the case. But yeah, that's definitely something we could look into. Sort of separate video there looking at undervolting CPUs and
people that want to be efficient out there.
Well, it's basically an underclocking, but it's the same rules as overclocking. So just because I can undervolt to a certain level doesn't mean you can.
Yep.
It's still a silicon lottery thing, but interesting all the same. Yeah. So I don't think I have too much more to say on that at the moment. But yeah, it's something we can definitely look into.
All right, another question from YouTube. Does the performance gain by using 3200 CL14 versus CL16 for Ryzen justify paying so much more for a 16 gig kit?
Well, I'm just going to assume that it is a lot more. I don't know the exact pricing off the top of my head, but let's just say it is a lot more. Is it justified? Well, first of all, it depends on what you're doing and what you're doing it with, I suppose. So if you're doing productivity type tests, rendering, encoding, all that kind of stuff, no is the answer. It won't really improve encoding time by a whole lot. I haven't done any recent tests, but is that your experience?
Yeah.
Not a huge amount of advantage there. I know when we did the sub-timing stuff, which really helped gaming, had very little impact on productivity. The next part of that is, okay, so let's say this is a gaming-related question. What are you gaming with? If you're gaming with an RTX 2080 Ti, then yeah, you'll probably see a nice performance uplift, 10, 15%. If you're gaming with the GTX 1060, then no, you'll see no performance uplift in pretty much any game. So yeah, it really comes down to what you're gaming with. And if you're gaming with an RTX, if you're gaming with, say, a GTX 1080 or higher, then spending the extra whatever it is on faster memory is a non-issue. So I have to assume that you're using a sort of mid-range to lower-end card. So in that case, no, it doesn't matter. Just get your CL16 stuff. And you can also tune your memory.
Yep.
So you might be able to get that down to CL15. The secondary time is you can probably tune up a bit. So you can probably get pretty close to stock CL14 performance there anyway. Okay, why does SLI/Crossfire need to be optimized for by developers? Could it be standardized and native to the operating system and to applications? Okay, so that's like a DirectX 11, DirectX 12 kind of.
Yeah. So yeah, it is kind of split between the DirectX 12 and DirectX 11 conversation, because on DirectX 11, if you go into the driver settings, you can actually force SLI on for pretty much every game. It just doesn't necessarily dictate how well it works.
Yeah, it could break the game.
It's just that you can actually enable it because it, uses certain types of rendering technologies. Yeah, and I guess the reason why it needs to be optimized is that there needs to be a lot of resource allocation between the, getting everything synced up nicely, and game engines are very different between each different game. So it's not necessarily the case that a game that has great scaling could be applied to every single game engine by just like some sort of operating system native standardization method. So yeah, because of that, it's similar to any game really. Even if you're not running SLI, a game needs to be optimized for the hardware at hand. So SLI is just another step, needs to be optimized for that as well.
Yeah, it's just another feature.
Yeah.
And if SLI was a thing that for some reason everyone had two graphics cards, then you would see it pretty much in every game.
Yeah.
But
because it's so niche that developers don't feel the need to optimize for it. And on DX12, it's a different sort of story, because for that, developers have the control over the dual GPU setup, so they can control exactly what they use each GPU for. They don't have to necessarily be both doing the same thing. They could allocate
and apparently
one GPU.
That's a lot of work.
So yeah, that, as I was just about to mention, a lot of work involved with that. So, and again, another step of optimization. You have to optimize DirectX 12 for the exact game engine that you have. So
I guess one way to look at it is that the game developer cares about as much, has the same care factor for someone with two RTX 2080 Ti's as it does with someone with a GTX 750 Ti. Because you've both paid the same amount of money for their game and their work.
Yeah.
So they have no interest in looking after the person with more money.
Exactly. It's just about making sure that their game works on a large variety of hardware, and it'll still work on dual GPU systems. You might not be able to run it in a dual GPU config, but as long as it works, the game developer will be happy.
Yeah, it was always more of an incentive for Nvidia and then AMD to sell more GPUs.
Yeah, exactly.
At the end of the day, once they've sold the GPUs, they don't really care that much how well it works, and clearly it doesn't really matter for most people. If they've got money to burn on two high-end GPUs, they will, regardless, it seems, just for that 3D mark score.
Okay, next question here. Do you think Nvidia is knowingly increasing the prices, seeing that there is no competition? If yet, what's your opinion about the future market for gamers?
Wow. Okay. Where do I even begin with this one? Well, they obviously want to make as much money as they can per GPU. There's a couple of things. I've lost the question on my phone, but anyway, I'll work if it wasn't that complicated. Turing isn't a big die. It's expensive to make. So if they want to make anywhere near the same margins they were with Pascal, they've got to charge a lot more. It's that simple. Yep. Unfortunately, we're not getting a lot more performance because a certain percentage, a reasonable size of that die, is for your RT cores and your Tensor cores, which we aren't currently using. Don't know if we'll be able to use those, but they're there and they're not really adding a lot of benefit. I think, like we said 2 months ago, more than a month before they were released, Nvidia is just capitalizing on the position that they're currently in. They want to push ray tracing. They want to employ that in their GPUs. And if they did that at a time when AMD's very competitive, they would have to absorb that cost to remain competitive. But they've found themselves in this position where they have no competition at the moment. They'll probably have competition next year. So rather than wait next year for that node shrink, they thought, well, we can do 12 nanometers now. We can make a big, huge GPU. We can charge a ton of money for it. We can push it as being this amazing ray tracing thing. Get the gamers to pay for the introduction of ray tracing, and we don't absorb any of that cost.
Okay, next question here. How tall are you both? You all seem tall.
I'm about 6'1".
Yeah, I'm about 5'11", so 179, 180 centimeters.
Yeah. A lot of people joke and say, well, they say it about me mostly, but do Tim and Steve have legs? Because we're normally sitting at the table. But I got up and showed you the chair before, and I was using my legs. Didn't enjoy it, but I was using them. So we do have legs.
Prefer not to use them.
Yeah, we have legs. We just prefer not to use them. So it's that simple. Okay, next question. You ready for it?
I am ready.
God,
Go for it.
Tim was sleeping on it. In your personal opinion, do you believe the RTX technology, so ray tracing, will be widely popular in the next 1 to 2 years? Or do you believe it will take longer than this to become mainstream? You're the RTX fan.
Oh, I wouldn't call myself a fan from what I've seen so far.
Tim's been covering on the channel, so I'll let you start with that one.
Yeah, will it be widely popular in the next 1 to 2 years? I'd certainly expect there to be more games, but I wouldn't say they'd be widely popular, and certainly would not be mainstream in 1 to 2 years. The issue is, as we've seen, it looks like performance will be absolutely awful, even on the high-end cards, when you enable ray tracing. So you think 1 to 2 years might get you good performance at the high end, and then you have to add on even more years before that comes down to mainstream, which is when it might be popular. And then on top of that, how many games will integrate ray tracing even when it's mainstream? So when you have all these things adding up, it's kind of like 1 to 2 years for it to get good on high end, another 2 years to get it into the mainstream, another maybe 2 years for it to become widespread in games and game engines. Yeah, we're looking at a lot longer than 1 to 2 years.
Yep. Pretty much nailed that. I'd liken it to DirectX 12 implementation, basically.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
How long ago? It's a long time ago now that we first heard about DirectX 12 and how it was going to revolutionize games and be amazing. So the adoption's so slow over such a long period that by the time it actually gets to where it was promised all those years ago, you don't even notice.
Yep.
It's like watching a tree grow almost. It's like, oh, now it's here.
Yep. Okay, another question. Other than graphics cards, high-end network cards, and the occasional sound card, what are expansion slots even needed for these days?
Well, all the things you just mentioned. I guess additional expansion slots. Well, you usually, on a mainstream platform, you get about, 3 PCIe times 16 slots and a couple of one-time slots, which admittedly can support sound cards and things like that. There's tons of things like, we have PCI Express capture cards. I'm not saying that that's a common thing, but as streaming and stuff like that becomes more popular, capture cards are a thing. Storage is a big thing. So obviously you've got your M.2s on most boards, but there are drawbacks to M.2 slots on motherboards. Well, first of all, you only have so many of them. But using PCI Express expansion cards, adapter cards, you can have better cooling. So you can put an M.2 card on those and they won't be under a component where they can heat up and stuff like that. So there's other things you can use for the storage as well. So it's not just that. But storage would be one thing, capture cards. Probably stuff that, I mean, it's just, that's the whole thing. It's a PC. It's the ability to expand and do whatever it is you want to do.
If you need something that's niche, you
can do it.
Imagine if you didn't have that expansion slot.
Yeah.
It'd be bad.
So
I think it has helped a lot with, USB and that sort of thing getting a lot faster, that you can, for stuff that doesn't necessarily need the bandwidth of PCI, you can run a lot of expansion stuff just over USB. But certainly there are some things that need more. That's
right. Back in the day, you didn't have that so much with computers. It was the PCI slots and stuff like that were very important. Okay, well, some pretty interesting questions there. Hope you guys enjoyed our response. And you're looking forward to part 2, which will be on the channel in a few days' time. Like I said, we'll probably squeeze a PAX video in between because we do have quite a bit of content we've got to get done over the weekend period. So anyway, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. What are you laughing at? And we'll see you next time.